Hi girls, it's Miss Gaska. Today I'm going to go over English 1, Semester 1, Week 2, Activity 2.2, Reviewing the Elements of a Story. So our learning targets for this activity are to identify the elements of a short story and place them on a plot diagram, to create characters and conflicts and choose a point of view for an original short story, and to identify and discuss the effect of point of view from which a story is told. So let's look at elements of a short story / narrative. A short story is a form of narrative. So kind of like how toads are like a type of frog, a short story is a type of narrative. Narrative includes many different categories, such as novels, stories, plays, anything that basically tells a story. And it can include made-up stories, fiction, as well as real-life stories, non-fiction. A short story is a work of fiction, and this genre includes certain literary elements. Alright? So, we're not going to be working with the partner, but we are going to talk about the list of elements of a plot. Okay? So as a class, well, not as a class, I'm going to lead you. We're going to be creating a complete list of literary terms associated with creating and analyzing the plot of any narrative. So, think about the things that you need in order to tell a story. It may not seem obvious to you at first, but you're going to need a setting. Obviously, the short story can't happen in nothingness. I mean, even nothingness would be a setting. If you had just a blank space, that would be a setting, even though a very unconventional one. So the story has to take place somewhere in order to exist. So it has to have the setting, it has to have some time when it happened, because it can't just not exist at any point in time. That doesn't make any sense. It's not something that our brains can really work around. So the setting, aka the time and place the story takes place, is a critical part of any story. Another thing that's really important to any story is that it has characters. What are you going to do with the story if there are no characters? Then it's just an essay or something. Nothing happens because there's nobody to make it happen. So you have to have characters in your story. Even if it's one of those choose your own ending kind of novels and the character is you, that's still a character though. So there needs to be characters. And those characters have to have personality traits. Because if these characters are kind of blank slates, then we don't really have much of a story going on. It also has to have events in the story, like things have to happen. A story where the character is just standing there is still an event, but it's also a very boring story. So things have to happen in your story. You also have to have some kind of a problem for your character to face, also called a conflict. So your character has to have some kind of issue that they're trying to overcome in some type of way in order for there to really be a story. If you tell a story about, the time that you went down to the store and bought milk and went home and there was no problem whatsoever in the whole story, it's not really going to be very interesting. Usually when we tell stories, our minds are inclined to discuss the problem of the story and how we overcame it. That's just the way that storytelling happens for us. It's the way it's always existed. So you need to have some kind of a conflict in order for that story to really be something that other people are wanting to be interested in. Usually you have protagonists and antagonists, but that isn't always the case. Because sometimes you have a protagonist who's just like in the woods, and then the antagonist is nature or, something like that. But you at least have a protagonist, which is the main character. Sometimes we think of the protagonist as the good guy, but sometimes our main characters aren't really that good. So I'm not going to use the term good guy, I'm going to use the term protagonist, meaning it's the character whose point of view that I'm telling the story from. And that's another thing, point of view. Somebody is telling the story. It could be the narrator, it could be the first person, which is like the main character of the story telling the point of view. It could be, in second person where it's like choose your own ending. So the point of view is another thing that you need. If there's nobody to tell the story, then the story doesn't exist. So there has to be a point of view. If there are any other things you can think of, which I'm sure there are, I'm just giving you a very basic list, feel free to let me know and add them to your own lists as well. So let's go down to the plot diagram. So there are many different steps that go along the plot diagram. But the main things that happen are there's exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and a resolution. So I'm going to go ahead and fill those words in the areas that they are supposed to be in. So this is the exposition. Ooh, I did not type where I clicked. Exposition. And the exposition, that's a way of saying the setup for the story. This is the thing that's introducing you to the characters, giving you the tone, giving you the setting, finding out where the story takes place, what time period. It's giving you all of the background information you need to know in order for this story to kind of make sense. All right? Then you have your rising action, which I'm going to add a text box because I think that it's going to allow me to maybe make it diagonal if I do that. So I'm going to try that real quick. Rising action. Your rising action is basically like things are starting to heat up. Like something is happening in your story that's causing some kind of a conflict. So, hold on. Whoops, hold on. That's not what I meant to do. So, well, that's okay. I am going to just drag and drop it right there. That's fine. That's a fine place for it. So here is my climax. That's like when you're on a roller coaster, it's like the very highest point. The point that you're like, oh crap, after this, like I have nothing else to be scared of because this is the highest one. So the climax, it's like the main thing that happens, like the big final, battle or, whatever all of this tension has been leading up to. Then after that, you have the falling action, which are like the things that when things start to slowly come together. You might have some different pieces that need to be resolved in some type of way, things like that. And then finally, you have the resolution, which is the happily ever after, even if the story doesn't end in a positive way. So we have all of these different steps. So as you're setting up this exposition, this is where we're going to be introduced to the protagonist, the point of view, the setting. During this rising action, we might meet other characters. We might learn to understand main character better, establish the main conflict, and secondary conflicts. Here during the climax, this is where stuff really starts to hit the fan. There's some kind of a big event that happens. The character gets tested in some way. Some huge way. The falling action, pieces start falling together. And then finally the resolution, which is the happily ever after, or happily or unhappily ever after. And I know some of this is a little bit hard to see, but I hope that you could see it. If you need to understand what it's saying, just go back in the video because I say everything as I'm typing it. So, continuing, we have this thing that says planning the story. In preparation for writing your own short story, brainstorm what you might include in a short story. Your ideas could become the basis of your short story for Embedded Assessment 1. An essential element of a short story's plot is conflict. Okay? Just like I was talking about, it needs to have some kind of problem that happens. Think about possible conflicts you could use to develop the plot and use the following prompts to think about both an internal and an external conflict for your character. So I want to say to you that there are multiple types of conflict, and I want to write them on the side really quick. So they're used in terms of man because man is used to describe humankind. But the conflicts are man versus man, which is when a person is having a conflict against another person, like another human. So two humans have a conflict between them. Man versus self, that's when somebody is fighting something inside them. Like maybe they don't have enough confidence to do the thing that they really want to do, so they have to overcome their own self-doubt. So having to overcome some problem within themselves. Then there's man versus nature, which is when a person has to struggle with some kind of usually some kind of a natural disaster or some kind of harsh climate. So a person struggles with overcoming some kind of harsh nature situation. There's man versus machine, which is where a person struggles with overcoming some kind of a technological entity. Sometimes it's like a robot revolution, or sometimes it could be like somebody fighting against some kind of an AI kind of spy, or this is usually for like kind of futuristic kind of things. There's man versus a system, like if a person is fighting against the government, or if there's some kind of system of racism they're fighting against, or a system of sexism. So it's when a person struggles to overcome like a broad system that affects a whole group. Okay, so I gave you several examples of conflict there. So hopefully that will somewhat inspire you to what kind of conflict you want to have at the central point of your story. So you want to think about an internal conflict, so something that the character is struggling with inside themselves. That's what internal means, is inside. And an external conflict, something that's going on the outside of their life. So for number 2, it says, think about a character for your short story. Create a name and 2 important characteristics of your character's personality. So your external conflict is going to be your character versus whomever they're fighting against. The internal conflict is whatever is going on inside themselves that they're struggling with. The character's name, then you have characteristic 1 and characteristic 2. Now, I'm not talking about like what color hair they have or what color eyes they have or if they're thick or whatever. I'm talking about personality characteristics. Are they smart? Are they dumb? Are they funny? Are they boring? Are they interesting? Are they, are they popular? Are they a nerd? Are they, what are they? Think about different traits that people can have and give your character just 2 of them. So, once you're done with that, comparing points of view. So, let's talk about the different kind of point of view that a story can have. So the point of view is the position from which a story is being told. Authors consciously choose a point of view when writing a story. So the point of view can be used in many different ways and has a unique stylistic choice made by the author. So this is really important. You have to decide who is telling the story. So here's an example of what's called first person point of view. And these titles for point of view are super, super important when it comes to taking your test, when it comes to establishing your knowledge about the English as a subject, because these are things that are going to come up again and again and again. So point of view, first person point of view. So here we have stories being told by a character in the story, okay? So it uses the word I, meaning the person who is telling the story happens to be a member of the story. They are in the story. So I decided to call him. Miss Baker had mentioned him at dinner, and that would do for an introduction. But I didn't call to him, for he gave a sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. He stretched out his arms toward the dark water in a curious way, and far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone again in the unquiet darkness. So we have a first-person point of view here, and some of the characteristics of this point of view is that this person is limited to how they see the world. They see somebody in the distance, and they see that he's trembling, but they don't know why he was trembling, and they don't even know if he was trembling for sure. And then they think they see a light in the distance that is probably from a dock, but they don't really know for sure where the lights come from. Alright? So, that point of view is limited to the character that is telling the story. Third person limited, from The Giver by Lois Lowry. Okay? So third person limited. So this point of view is told from an outsider's perspective, somebody who's not in the story. And the narrator usually focuses on the character and any characters that come around them, but they can't see what's happening with other characters in the story. That's why it's called limited. Usually, at the morning ritual, when the family members told their dreams, Jonas didn't contribute much. He rarely dreamed. Sometimes he awoke with feelings of fragments afloat in his sleep, but he couldn't seem to grasp them and put them together into something worthy of telling at the ritual. But this morning was different. He had dreamed very vividly the night before. His mind wandered while Lily, as usual, recounted a lengthy dream, this one a frightening one in which she had, against the rules, been riding her mother's bicycle and been caught by the security guards. So here, in third-person point of view, we're getting the perspective of Jonas, the main character, and the people who are around him, such as his mother and father, and Lily, his sister. So we don't really see the person in the house next door, or the character down the street, or any of Jonas's friends in their own houses. We only see the people immediately around Jonas. We know what happens in Jonas's head. We talk about his dreams. We talk about him waking up. But Jonas isn't the one telling the story, so we have a third-person limited point of view. It's kind of like if you were given the power to see inside one person's head and experience what their life is like, but from an outsider's perspective. Third-person omniscient. The word omniscient means all-knowing. So think about like Santa Claus, for instance. They say Santa Claus is all-knowing, meaning he knows everything good and bad you do all year. So third-person omniscient is kind of like that. They're all-knowing about everybody in the story. But it's also told from somebody outside of the story. So you have signs of life were visible now on the beach. The sand, trembling beneath the heat haze, concealed many figures in its miles of length. Boys were making their way toward the platform through the hot, dumb sand. 3 small children, no older than Johnny, appeared from startlingly close at hand, where they had been gorging fruit in the forest. A dark little boy, not much younger than Piggy, parted a tangle of undergrowth, walked onto the platform, and smiled cheerfully at everybody. More and more of them came. Taking their cue from the innocent Johnny, they sat down on the fallen palm trunks and waited. So we see what various characters in the story are doing, not focusing on just one. They mentioned Johnny a few times, so I kind of can assume that he's probably going to be a main character, if not one of the... He's going to be one of the main characters, if not the main character. But I'm getting some details about everything. I'm getting details about the sand. I'm getting details about the environment. I'm getting details about what the different little boys are doing. So that would be a third-person omniscient, because I know everything that's going on with the different characters in the story and the setting. So, whoops, I accidentally just answered this for you. Reread the excerpts and underline the words or sentences that helped you determine point of view. What are the characteristics of each point of view? So list the characteristics that we just talked about under each of these things. Then, come to number 4. What are the advantages and disadvantages of each? It says to work in pairs, but you could do this independently. What are the advantages and disadvantages of writing in first person? What are the advantages and disadvantages of third-person limited, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of third-person omniscient? So examine and discuss the differences among the 3 points of view. So just examine them and then write in that space what the differences are between the 3. And then for number 6, it says think about what point of view you might use in your short story. Briefly explain why you chose that point of view. So pick out one of these 3 in order to write your short story, or prepare for writing your short story, and explain why you think that you want to use that point of view when you're writing. So here, it wants you to explain why an author would choose to tell a story in the first person, the third person limited, or the third person omniscient point of view. So put yourself in the shoes of the author and see what each of those perspectives gives you. What does that help you with? And then explain why an author would choose to tell the story in that type of way. Here we have a narrative writing prompt. It says return to the conflicts and characters that you created earlier in Activity 2.2. Write an opening to the story that presents the character, the conflicts, and or the setting using the point of view that you think would be best to narrate the story. So be sure to provide an introduction to the main character through description of their appearance, actions, and voice. Include a central conflict that will drive the events of the story and develop the character, and include an internal or external conflict for the main character. And finally, use a consistent point of view. That's all there is for Activity 2.2. I'll see you in the next video for Activity 2.3. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.